Hi Reddit. I'm not one of those people who likes to complain or air their personal life in public, but lately, one question has been tormenting me, and maybe someone here can help me figure it out. My name is Alex, I'm 32. I was born in a small town in the south of England, in a family where everything seemed normal. A house with a garden, an old Ford, mom a nurse, dad an auto mechanic. We weren't rich, but we weren't struggling either. A typical middle-class family, at least, that's what I thought until I got older. From childhood, I felt that love in our home had to be earned. Not just by behaving well, not just by being a kid, but by proving you were worthy. Dad loved to repeat, "The world doesn't owe you anything, Alex, not even family." Back then, I didn't realize how literally he meant it. When I turned 14, I started noticing that things with my parents weren't so simple. We had a younger brother, Jamie, mom's favorite. She literally worshipped him. The slightest scratch and the whole family was on alert. And me, I was the one who only got praised for something useful: washed the car. Good job, fixed the fence, at least you're not slacking. Got a B, why not an A? Everything I did was never enough. I remember one evening I got an award at school for physics achievements. I was damn proud of myself. Came home, showed it to Dad. He looked at it, shrugged, and said, "Physics is bullshit. Will that award bring you money? No. Then don't waste your time." That's when I first felt something breaking in my chest. At 16, I got a part-time job at a local cafe. I wanted to buy myself a used bike without asking my parents for money. Mom said the job was distracting me from school. Dad said it was a disgrace, serving people coffee. But I went anyway. That's when I first tasted freedom. Earned my first 60 pounds, bought an old jacket, and was happier than ever. My parents weren't. A month later, Dad furiously threw out my backpack with my work uniform, declaring that no one in our house will work as a servant. I left home for the night to stay with a friend. Back then, it was just a protest, teenage stupidity. But now, years later, I realize it was the first step toward completely breaking away from them. When I finished school, I wanted to go to university in Manchester. I got a grant, but I needed a little help from my parents to pay part of the dorm and the ticket. They said no. "We're not going to sponsor your stupidity, Alex. If you want to study, earn it yourself. At 18, you're a grown man. You're on your own." I remember that conversation like it was yesterday. I stood in the kitchen doorway, packet of documents in hand, while Dad sat at the table, flipping through the newspaper, not looking at me. Mom stood at the stove, her back to me. "So, you're serious? I have to do everything myself." "Yes," Dad said without even lifting his eyes. "We've done our part, the rest is your life." I turned 18 then. A week later, I packed a bag and left. If any of you have ever slept on someone else's kitchen floor, eating instant noodles, you'll understand. It was the hardest year of my life. I worked at that same cafe, then got a job at a warehouse. Sometimes I didn't have enough for bus fare. Once, I slept at a bus stop, just because I didn't want to go back to the dingy dorm that smelled of mold. But you know what's interesting? I never once called my parents. Not out of pride. Because I knew they didn't care. I tried calling a couple of times. They didn't pick up. Once Mom texted briefly, "Don't call. If you decided to be independent, be it." 2 years later, I accidentally ended up at an IT company, first as a handyman. One of the engineers saw that I picked things up quickly and gave me a chance to help set up servers. That's how it all started. At night, I learned programming from free courses, read forums, watched videos. A year later, I got my first contract, freelance, £1,200. 3 years later, they invited me to a full-time position. 6 years later, I was earning more than my dad had in his entire life. I'm not bragging, it's just, Important for context. When you live a life like that, from loneliness and humiliation to first successes, you start to understand what real freedom is. At the same time, you carry a heavy burden, the feeling that everything you've achieved is out of spite for someone. I tried to suppress that in myself. I thought that someday I could go back, reconcile. But time passed and I saw how my parents lived on, never wrote, never wished me happy birthday, never even asked if I was alive. When I turned 28, I bought a house, small but mine. And you know what I did that day? I looked in the mirror and said out loud, "You did this without them." It was the best moment of my life. I didn't know that a few years later, everything would change. About 6 months ago, I got a call from an unknown number. I didn't pick up, then another one. On the third time I answered. "Alex, it's Mom." I hadn't heard her voice in over 10 years. It was different, dry, hoarse, as if there was no warmth left in it. "Mom, something happened." Pause, then a sob. "We need help, Dad. Dad can't work anymore. We lost the house, pension. We can't manage." I was silent, just sat there gripping the phone. 1,000 thoughts flashed through my head. They kicked you out. They said you're on your own. And now they need help. I asked quietly, "Why are you calling me?" "Because," her voice trembled, "you're the only one who can help." After the conversation, I just sat in the dark, holding the phone. Not anger, not joy, nothing. Just emptiness. I thought about those years when I had nothing to eat. About sleeping in a cold room and dreaming of a simple call. And now, after 14 years, they're asking me to save them. It wasn't joy, not schadenfreude. It was a feeling of power. Not in the sense of revenge, but in the sense of control. For the first time in my life, everything depended on me. Not on their decisions, not on their expectations, not on their words. On me. I could help them. I could refuse. I could make them feel what I felt. But you know what? I didn't know what I wanted. I didn't answer then. I said I needed to think. Mom just whispered, "Alex, please, we're not asking for much, just a little help." And hung up. That night I didn't sleep. One phrase from Dad kept echoing in my head. At 18, you're on your own. And now I'm an adult on my own. And it seems it's time to decide what that really means. I didn't sleep the whole night after that call. Not because I was doubting, just couldn't believe it had happened at all. 14 years of silence and suddenly, "Alex, help." I sat by the window, watching the dawn slowly paint the street in dull gold. Only one thought in my head, why now? Why not back then, when I was sleeping on the floor and eating cheap cereal, counting every coin? In the morning, I went to the cafe where I usually worked on my laptop. My old friend Tom was behind the counter. He noticed I looked off. "Everything okay, dude?" "You know, my mom called yesterday." "Mom, you said you hadn't talked in years." 14 years to be exact. "And what did she say?" "That they need help, financial." Tom whistled. "Whoa, and what did you say?" "That I'd think about it." He nodded, but I saw the question in his eyes that I was afraid to ask myself. "And what are you going to do?" I didn't know. Part of me wanted to say no and hang up. But another part, the one deep inside that still waited for approval, whispered, "What if this is a chance?" A couple of days later, I got a letter. A real paper one, with uneven handwriting. Mom's. She wrote that Dad had lost his job, his health had deteriorated, the house was sold, they were living in a small rented apartment. At the end, the plea, "We're not asking for much, Alex, just a little support to get through this year. We know we did wrong once. Please don't turn away." I reread that letter 10 times. Each line pressed on an old wound. A week later, I finally gathered myself and went to see them. It was probably the strangest decision of my life. I didn't know what to expect. Anger, apologies, manipulation. I just wanted to see them and understand if I could ever trust them again. The drive took 3 hours. I pulled up to a small brick house on the outskirts of Leeds. It looked sad. Old curtains, peeling paint, overgrown grass in the yard. I got out of the car, stood for a few seconds just staring at the door. My heart was pounding, as if I were that 18-year-old kid again being told, "You're on your own." Mom opened the door. For a moment, we just stood there, not moving. She looked older, not by age but by life. Gray hair, dull eyes, trembling hands. "Alex," she whispered. I didn't respond, just nodded. "Come in, son." The word son sounded false, like it belonged to someone else. Inside was modest. Old chairs, the smell of cheap coffee and medications. On the table, a stack of letters, some with red "Final Notice" stamps. And there he was, Dad, sitting in an armchair, pale, thinner, with an oxygen tube at his nose. He looked up, and for a second I saw in his eyes not judgment but shame. "Alex." "Hi, Dad." We were silent. Mom poured tea. I felt my hands shaking as I took the cup. "We didn't know how to call you," Mom started. "You changed your number." "I did, about 10 years ago." "Yes, we realized when it stopped working." Pause. Dad coughed. "Alex, I won't beat around the bush. We were wrong back then, badly." I raised my eyebrows. "Wrong? You kicked me out of the house, said I was on my own. You didn't answer calls when I was sleeping on the street. You call that a mistake?" He lowered his eyes. "I thought I was teaching you to be strong." "No, Dad, you taught me not to need you, and you succeeded." Mom quietly cried. I turned away. After a minute, she wiped her tears and said, "We're not asking you to forget, just, we have no one else. Jamie moved to Australia, he doesn't respond to letters. We can't pay for housing, medications, bills." "And why didn't you reach out to him earlier?" I asked. Mom hesitated. "He said he has his own family, that he's not obligated to help." I smirked. "Funny hearing that from you." Dad frowned but stayed silent. Mom continued, "We don't know what to do. We're ashamed to ask, Alex, but please, you won't let us die on the street, right?" Those words hit me in the chest. Not because I pitied them, but because for the first time in years they sounded truly weak, without masks, without pride. I left that evening without an answer. They didn't insist, just said, "Think about it, we're not expecting miracles." In the car I sat silently, looking at my hands. The same ones that once shook from the cold. Now they held keys to a car, earned by my own labor. And I asked myself, if I help them, won't I become that boy again, waiting for approval? If I don't, won't I become just like they were then? There was no answer. The next day, I told Tom everything. He listened silently, then said, "Alex, you don't owe them anything." "But they're my parents." "Parents aren't just the people who gave birth to you. They're the ones who were there when you fell. Were they there?" I lowered my eyes. "No." "Then you don't owe them." But damn it, it wasn't that simple. You can logically understand that you're not obligated. But emotionally, blood is blood. And for me, that connection was like rusty iron, old but still holding. The following days, I spent in a fog. I tried to work, but thoughts kept returning to them. Sometimes I'd catch myself standing by the fridge, staring into space. One evening, I pulled an old box from the closet. Inside were photos, me, Mom, Dad, and Jamie at the sea. I was about 10 then. We were all smiling. And I suddenly realized that might have been the last time I felt part of a family. On the seventh day, Mom called. "Alex, have you thought?" I sighed. "Yes." And I fell silent. She seemed to sense my hesitation and added, "We're not asking for charity, just a little to pay for medications and housing. We'll figure it out after." I wanted to say no, but instead I asked, "How much do you need?" She named the amount. Small but noticeable. I knew for them it was salvation, for me, just a number. "Okay," I said, "I'll transfer it, but on one condition." "What?" "You never ask me for money again, ever." Silence, then quietly, "Okay, son, thank you." The word son stung again. I felt everything inside me tightening. I transferred the money that evening. The amount wasn't huge, but for them, a fortune. Almost immediately, a message came. "Thank you, Alex, we're very grateful." I didn't reply, just put the phone on the table and stared out the window. For some reason, instead of relief, I felt emptiness. I thought that would be the end. But no. They called again. This time, Dad. His voice rough, heavy, but laced with a plea. "Alex, this is awkward, but..." I already knew where it was going. "No, Dad." "Wait, you won't even listen." "I listened to you 14 years ago when you said I was on my own. I haven't forgotten." He was silent, then said quietly, "You've become as cold as I was." I smirked. "Maybe, but I learned it from you." And hung up. That night I couldn't sleep for a long time. Deep down I knew this wasn't the end. They didn't just want money. There was something else. I felt it. And I knew ahead was a conversation that would change everything. After that call, I didn't answer anyone for a week. The phone lay in a desk drawer, like a reminder that the past doesn't let go, even if you've long left it behind. I tried to convince myself that I'd done the right thing. That I said no, not out of anger, but out of self-respect. But every evening when I sat in my empty apartment, turned on music, and grabbed a mug of tea, the silence started speaking louder than any arguments. Why do I still think about them? Why the hell can't I just let go? One evening, I decided to clean out the closet. There was a dusty cardboard box I hadn't opened in 10 years. Inside, old papers, receipts, photos, letters. Among them, an envelope labeled, "Do not open." The handwriting was familiar, Mom's. I opened it. Inside, copies of documents, bank letters, and some legal paper with my name. I slowly scanned the lines, and my heart sank. Loan agreement number 40, 8,519. Parties: Margaret Wilson, borrower; Alexander Wilson, co-borrower. Amount: £30,000. What? I reread it 3 times. I was 18 when they kicked me out. How could I be a co-borrower? I remembered the day it all started. I came home from school. They were sitting at the table, and the atmosphere was weird. Mom was crying. Dad looked irritated. "What's going on?" I asked then. "Nothing, Alex, just adult stuff," he replied. A week later, he said, "Son, it's time for you to become independent. We can't support you anymore." Then the door, suitcase, and the street. Now I understood. They put me on the debt without my knowledge. And when the bank started demanding money, they got rid of the co-borrower to avoid paying. I sat staring at the paper, feeling everything inside boiling. That's why they didn't answer calls. That's why I couldn't get a loan for housing back then. The bank said I already had a debt, but I didn't understand what they meant. I thought it was a mistake. But it was them. My own parents. The next morning, I called Mom. She picked up right away. "Alex, thank you for calling," her voice trembled. "We were so worried." "Mom, what's this loan?" Pause. "What loan, son?" The one you took out in my name when I was 18. 30,000 pounds. Found the documents. Silence. Long. Heavy. Then whispering, you found them. Yes. Alex, we didn't know how to tell you. Didn't know. You just used me, then kicked me out to cover your tracks. No, it's not like that, Dad interjected, apparently standing nearby. Things were bad then. We lost the business, banks were pressuring us. If not for you, they'd have taken the house. So you saved the house by putting debt on your son. We thought we'd pay it off in time. And then just threw me out so I wouldn't find out. He was silent. I only heard Mom's breathing. I hung up and just sat on the floor. I was shaking. Only one thought in my head. They didn't just abandon me. They betrayed me even earlier. Everything I'd built over these years, every drop of strength, confidence, suddenly crumbled. All this time I blamed myself, thought I deserved their coldness. But it turns out, I was just a convenient way to sweep the dirt under the rug. The more I thought, the clearer the little things became. How Dad always got nervous when letters arrived. How Mom tried not to look me in the eyes. How they said trust us when I signed some papers, not understanding what. I was 17. I just wanted them to be proud of me. That night I didn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the scene. Me standing on the threshold, suitcase in hand, and Dad saying, "We've done all we could for you." No, you did all you could for yourselves. In the morning, I wrote to my lawyer friend, John. I sent him scans of the documents and asked if anything could be done. He replied almost immediately, "Alex, this is serious, but if you didn't sign it knowingly, we can prove fraud. There's a chance they forged the signature." I froze. Forged? I remembered. Mom brought the papers, said, "It's just a bank form for your school account." I didn't even read it, just signed. "They did it on purpose," I said, sitting across from Tom. "Dude, that's beyond." "Yeah, and now they want me to fund their old age." "What are you going to do?" "First find out everything to the end, then we'll see." Tom nodded. "Just Alex, don't let them control you again." "I won't." But deep down I knew, this story isn't over yet. A couple of days later, I went back to those documents. At the bottom of the box was a folder labeled property. I opened it and found the house sale contract. Date, a month after they kicked me out. The house they took the loan for in my name, they sold it. So they didn't even try to keep it. Just took the money and left. I sat on the floor and laughed. So loud and madly that the neighbor downstairs knocked on the ceiling. The laughter quickly turned to tears. How could they? How could they sell the house, kick out their son, and pretend nothing happened? I remembered how they recently asked for money to pay for housing. Housing they once bought using my documents. Instead of despair, a cold calm came. I realized I had to learn everything. I found the notary's name and the documents who handled the deal. Called, introduced myself, said I wanted to clarify details on an old contract. He replied, "Yes, I remember that family, the Wilsons. They were in a hurry then, did everything in one day." And Alexander Wilson's signature, was it in person? As far as I remember, no. The mother came, said the son couldn't come, brought a power of attorney. Power of attorney? Yes, signed supposedly by you. I gripped the phone. Can I get a copy of that power of attorney? Of course, I'll email a scan. Half an hour later, the email arrived. I opened the file and saw the signature. Mine, but it's not mine. It was similar but slightly different. Whoever did it was clearly trying to imitate. Lawyer John confirmed, "It's a fake. We can prove the signature was forged." I sat silently, laptop on my knees. So all this time, I wasn't just abandoned. I was deceived. I felt something click inside, as if that boy who once hoped his parents would change died. In his place was a man who saw the truth. And the truth was cold. I dialed Mom's number again, this time without emotions. Alex, joyfully, as if nothing had happened. "Mom, did you forge my signature on the power of attorney?" Silence. I didn't want things to get out of control. "So it's true. We were afraid we'd end up on the street then. So you decided it was okay to steal from your own son." She cried. "We thought you'd understand." "I do, only now for real." "Alex, please don't go to the police. Dad's sick, we won't survive a trial." "I haven't decided what to do yet." I hung up. That evening it was raining. I stood by the window, watching drops slide down the glass. Tom's words echoed in my head, "You don't owe them anything." Now I knew it wasn't just morality. It was fact. But along with the anger, I felt a strange relief. I finally understood that all this time, I'd been trying to earn love that never existed. And for the first time in many years, I didn't want to call or write. I just wanted peace. Only deep inside, there was a feeling that this wasn't the end yet. That soon I'd have to make a choice, forgive or destroy them completely. After that conversation with my mother, I didn't leave the house for 3 days. The phone lay on the table, silent and insistent, like a reproach. I tried to distract myself. Work, exercise, Netflix, nothing helped. Every time the screen went dark, I saw her trembling voice before my eyes. "Dad's sick, we won't survive a trial." At first I thought manipulation. But part of me still clung to the idea that maybe this time she wasn't lying. On Thursday I went to the lawyer. John met me in his office, neat, with shelves lined with folders and the smell of coffee. "Alex," he said, nodding, "sit down, I've reviewed everything you sent." And he opened the folder. "The forgery is obvious. Criminal charge. If you file a report, it'll start an investigation, and believe me, they'll have to answer." I nodded, but inside I felt not satisfaction but emptiness. "Something wrong?" he asked. "Just didn't think I'd live to see the day when I'm discussing a criminal case against my own parents." John frowned. "Alex, I understand it's hard, but this isn't about revenge. It's about justice. They used you. If someone else did this, you wouldn't hesitate." "I know, it's not someone else." He nodded, poured me coffee. "Think about it, you have time. But not too long, the statute of limitations isn't infinite." In the evening I sat on the balcony looking at the city. London was beautiful in its weariness, endless lights, cars, people hurrying home. And I didn't know what home was. I remembered how in childhood, Mom baked apple pie on Sundays. How Dad taught me to change a light bulb. How once we all went to the sea as a family, the last time everything seemed real. I caught myself thinking that I missed not them, but who they could have been. At 9 in the evening the phone rang. Unknown number. "Hello." "Alex, it's me, Martha." "Martha, my parents' neighbor." "Hi, something happened." "I don't know if anyone told you. Your father is in the hospital." I stood up. "What, when?" "This morning, he had a heart attack." My heart clenched. "Is he alive?" "Yes, but his condition is serious. Mom's with him. She asked not to call, but I thought you should know." I thanked her, hung up, and just stood there. Everything inside was fighting: anger, compassion, pain. I arrived at the hospital around midnight. In the lobby, white light, smell of antiseptic, hum of footsteps. At the reception desk, I introduced myself, and the nurse led me to the ward. Mom was sitting in the hallway, hunched over, holding a paper cup of cold coffee. When she saw me, her eyes widened. "Alex." "Where is he?" I asked dryly. In the room, the doctor said he's stable, but I nodded and walked past. Dad lay on the bed, pale, with an oxygen mask. For a second, it seemed like this wasn't the man who once said, "We've done all we could for you." I stood at the door, not knowing what to feel. The anger gone somewhere, only emptiness remained. He opened his eyes. "Alex." I came closer. "Hi." He tried to smile, but the corners of his mouth trembled. "Didn't expect to see you." "I didn't expect to come either." He closed his eyes, sighed heavily. "Everything turned out not how we wanted." "Wanted what?" "To steal my name and then pretend to be victims." He didn't answer, just said quietly, "We were desperate then. I thought we'd manage. Then it was too late." "Too late? Too late for what? For apologies?" He looked away. "You grew into a good man, Alex. We knew you'd make it." "Yeah, thanks to you, right." Silence. I went out into the hallway. Mom was still sitting there. "Did he talk?" she asked. "A little, not what was needed." She nodded, squeezing the cup. "I know you're angry, and you have the right. But Alex, he's not eternal. If you want to say something, do it now." I sat next to her. "And you, were you ever going to confess?" Every day I wanted to. But the longer I waited, the scarier it became. Scarier for what? For me or for you? For everything. She cried. I looked at her and realized, yes, before me wasn't a monster, but not the mother I once loved either. Just a person who made too many mistakes and couldn't fix them. I visited Dad 3 more times. He hardly spoke, just looked. On the 3rd day, I brought apple pie, the same one from Mom's recipe. He ate a piece, quietly said, "Taste of childhood." Yeah, only back then everything was simpler. He nodded, as if he wanted to add something but couldn't. 2 days later, he was gone. Rain, umbrellas, gray grass underfoot. Mom stood nearby, holding a handkerchief. Lena and Mark flew in. I hadn't talked to them in years. After the ceremony, they approached me. "Alex, we heard about the debt story," Lena said. "Sorry for them." "It's not your fault." Mark lowered his eyes. "Mom's alone now. Will you help her?" I looked at him and quietly replied, "I don't know." A week later, Mom came to me herself. Sat in the kitchen, carefully, as if afraid to touch anything. "I know I have no right to ask," she said, "but if you can, don't file a lawsuit, not for me, for his memory." I was silent. "I'll leave everything to you. The house, accounts, just don't destroy everything completely." I laughed. "You really think I need your money, after everything?" "No, just I'm tired." She looked older than I remembered. Broken. And suddenly I felt not anger, pity. "What are you going to do?" Tom asked. "I don't know." "She deserves punishment." "Maybe, but I'm tired of revenge." Tom nodded. "Then just live. That will be the best revenge." A couple of days later, I got a letter, in Mom's handwriting. "Alex, if you're reading this, it means I've finally decided to write. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I want you to know, we were always proud of you. We just didn't know how to show it. We did terrible things, and if you can, don't repeat our mistakes." I sat with that letter in my hands for a long time. My soul was empty but calm. I didn't go to court. I forgave, not because they deserved it, but because I wanted to be free. Since then, I've lived the way that boy who was kicked out at 18 would have wanted. I save money, not for someone else but for myself. I meet people who choose to be around, not obligated. Sometimes I go on Reddit and read stories like mine. And every time I think, sometimes being an AHOLE means finally stopping being a victim. 5 years have passed. Since I closed the last page of the story with my family, Life slowly entered a track that finally felt like mine. I no longer woke up with anxiety, didn't wait for calls, didn't think I had to prove my worth to anyone. The world became quieter, and in that quiet I heard myself for the first time. I stayed in London, rented an apartment closer to the river, got a dog, a border collie named Jasper. Work was going uphill. The company where I once started as an intern entrusted me with a department. Sometimes I even caught myself smiling for no reason. Friends joked that I'd become too calm for someone with such a past. But I knew it wasn't calm, it was freedom. One gray October day, I came home and found an envelope in the mailbox with no return address. My name was written on it, in neat, slightly trembling handwriting. I recognized it immediately. Mom's. My heart clenched. I thought she wouldn't write again. We hadn't seen each other in 3 years. After the funeral, we hadn't exchanged a word. I sat in the kitchen, tore open the envelope. Alex, if you're reading this, it means I have nothing left to lose. I don't want to ask for forgiveness again. You've already done more for me than I deserve. But I want to tell you something you didn't know. About why everything happened the way it did. And maybe then you'll understand that we didn't just ruin your life, but tried to save ours. I froze. Under the sheet was a scrap of paper, a copy of a bank agreement, dated the year of my 18th birthday. Dad's signatures, the amount, the same one I later paid off. But next to it was a second signature, someone else's. Name Harold Miller. I spent the rest of the evening studying the document. Apparently, Dad took the loan not on himself, but on a person he once worked with. Mom wrote that it was his colleague, the one who promised to bail out the family, but in the end ran off, leaving the debt on them. Everything that happened after was an attempt to save the house and reputation. When they were denied refinancing, Mom, in desperation, forged my signature. They hoped to pay back the money before I found out. And everything went wrong. I reread the letter 3 times. With each line, the pain became not sharper, but quieter. I finally saw not just their guilt, but their fear. A week later, I went to that same town where my childhood years passed. The house stood in the same place, faded, overgrown with ivy. In the yard where my sister and I once ran, now stood a bench. On it, an old woman feeding pigeons. Martha, the same neighbor. Alex, her eyes widened. Lord, how you've grown. Hello, Martha, I came for a bit. She nodded. Your mom often sat here, until the very end. End, the word stuck in my throat. She passed last winter, quietly in her sleep. I closed my eyes. Not because I was shocked, I think I knew it would happen. But deep inside, it still made me cold. I entered the house. Dust, smell of old wood, photos on the walls. One, me in school uniform with messy hair. Another, us as a family on the beach, smiling. I went to the kitchen. On the table, a cup with dried tea. On the fridge, a note stuck with a magnet. If anyone ever reads this, don't judge too harshly. We just didn't know how to be good parents. I sat on the chair, the same one where Dad once read the newspaper. And for the first time in many years, I cried. I called my sister. Alex. Hi, I'm at the house. At the house, she fell silent. Why? Got a letter from Mom, she explained a lot. I knew she was writing to you. She said she couldn't leave without trying to fix everything. Why didn't you tell me she was gone? I didn't know how. We haven't talked in ages. I thought you wouldn't want to hear. I was silent. You know, Lena, I'm not angry anymore. Really? Yeah, just tired of living in it. In the backyard stood an old tree. When I was 10, Dad planted it with me. Now it had grown, spread its branches, almost touching the roof. I pulled out the urn with Mom's ashes from my bag. Lena had sent it to me by mail. Said Mom wanted to be with Dad. I scattered the ashes under the tree. There, I said quietly, now you're together. Jasper quietly rubbed against my leg, as if he understood. I stood there long, until the sun dipped below the horizon. And for the first time, I felt not pain, not anger, but lightness. A month later, I returned to London. In the mailbox, a new envelope. From Lena. Alex, I found a draft letter in Mom's drawer, addressed to you, but she never sent it. I think you should read it. Inside, a sheet of paper, covered in that same trembling handwriting. Son, I know you don't believe words anymore. But if you ever think we didn't love you, remember how we sat by the sea, ate ice cream, and laughed until the sun set. In that moment, we were real. Everything else was fear. If you can, forgive us not as parents, but as people who couldn't handle it. Love you. Mom. I folded the letter and put it in the desk drawer. Not as evidence, but as a reminder. Love isn't always perfect. Sometimes it's ugly, sick, destructive. But still love. 2 more years passed. I bought a small house by the sea. In the mornings I walked Jasper, watched the waves crash on the shore. Sometimes I think, if my parents could see me now, would they understand that I'm finally happy? I no longer think I owe them anything. But I don't carry hatred in my heart either. Sometimes, reading posts in AITA where someone writes, AITA for cutting off my toxic parents, I smile because I know the answer. You're not the if you chose yourself. You just finally stopped being the one who pays other people's debts, not just financial, but emotional. Sometimes forgiveness isn't an act of kindness, it's an act of liberation.